and hello to our virtual audience, wherever you may be. I'm assuming I can be heard here. Okay. Yeah, as Ben said, you know, preparing for the unprepared, talking about prepared piano today, I did ask myself some questions. Firstly, you know, now the prepared piano is absolutely everywhere. It's, we hear it in film, we have people writing for it, we have many iterations of it, many different performers have now embraced it. It's really part of contemporary language. So I was a little concerned that everybody knew it. And then I was talking to Rob Vesti, who I'm going to work with tomorrow, who said, what is the prepared piano? I know absolutely nothing about it. And it occurred to me that a lot of our dance students, maybe a lot of our music students also, would not have come across it. So I'm very pleased to go into a few details, and I apologize to those of you who know it inside out and have written for it or played it before. It's interesting also, this title, Preparing for the Unprepared, because in the context of improvisation, which I'm also going to be talking about today, I was thinking it's very much also preparing for the unexpected, both in what results you will get when you prepare, because as Jen, I think, was saying, she worked yesterday, and yet, you know, she rehearsed yesterday, and what she had today sounded entirely different to her. And indeed, it may very well be the same for me, and the gestures that I use may be also very different. So it's a very interesting interface then, I think, between preparing this instrument, this very low-tech instrument in a way, and improvisation and techniques. So before I talk a little bit about the history of this instrument, for those who perhaps aren't sure about it, I'm going to talk, just speak a little bit about me and my work and my history. For some time, my work's focused on exploring and developing extended techniques and inventing my own approach to the instrument and to challenge audience expectations and, I hope, preconceived notions of a performance through subverting the iconography, the very, very strong iconography of the piano. The guitarist, very favorite performer of mine, Fred Frith, used a beautiful phrase, which is defeating the characteristics of the instrument. And for me, it's subverting the instrument and its very strong conventions. So I'm going to move this. I mean, even just for us, looking at that, we already have an incredible focus on what we're going to hear. We have expectations of what that is, what kind of concert that's going to be, what kind of sound that concert grand is going to make, what kind of performer is going to walk out there on stage, and you know, and envelop the space with sound and interact with the space. And of course, when you're working with something like a prepared piano, the interesting thing is that you will, by and large, be working with a concert grand piano. And so when the performer walks out, I mean, I think it might be slightly different here because rather cruelly we have a camera put right in the center to see absolutely everything that's going on that I'm doing. But I think you know, on a concert stage, you cannot see inside the instrument. And so there's this interesting theatrical element as well to the performance and subverting, I would say, the audience's expectations, which above and beyond the sound of the piano, my interest in that is something that I'm trying to get across. It's something that I'm trying to distance myself from and my audience from, to kind of shock the audience in a way, a little way. As a soloist, I work closely and collaboratively, I have to emphasize, with composers, developing new repertoires, both as written pieces and also in the context, in various collaborative contexts, as an improviser, I would say a free improviser. Prepared piano throughout my life has been the springboard for my more extended explorations. I started working on it as a student. I come from Sydney, and when I was young, I was very inspired by a visit from John Cage to the conservatory there, and the rest is history. I began preparing all the pianos in the institution and getting into terrible trouble for doing so. But my enduring love of the pieces by John Cage, who of course was the creator, the inventor of the so-called prepared piano, stems from that time. Cage wrote exclusively for this wonderful creation of his throughout the 1940s. But I'll talk a little bit about Cage's history soon. As I said, it's been the springboard for many extended explorations through working more gesturally, for one thing, outside the, very much these days, I would say outside the keyboard, off the keyboard, and working very much within the harp of the piano, what we call the harp, this area here, and for obvious reasons, because it's cross-strung, and this is where we move. I also work with electronic extensions and interactions. I manipulate sounds via MIDI devices, so this is where it gets a little more high-tech, just a little, such as the piano scan, which is a device which functions with light sensors, and it's put underneath the action of the piano. You can imagine why I'm not demonstrating on this today. It's quite a job to take out the action and to put it in and to work with that. It then generates all sorts of pictures via different kinds of programs, such as Max MSP, Super Collider, and Ableton, just to name three. I've also worked with augmented keyboard instruments. We speak a lot today, rather than preparedness, we talk about augmenting and extending our techniques and our instruments. The capabilities of this instrument are extended beyond the normal limitations of the instrument via these new technologies. As I mentioned, digital sensors, physical modifications, and other sound hacks. One of these includes the interesting resonator, the magnetic resonator piano, which is an instrument which enables a pianist to produce harmonics, glissandi between pitches, notes sustained indefinitely, and various timbral effects. So the Max MSP patch is this little MIDI keyboard that you see here, which is attached to a standalone Max program, is something that I tend to use within improvisations, but it was a part of a piece written for me by a chair of composition at Berkeley University in California when I did a residency there some years ago. And this is a very interesting device. It's as I said, it's a standalone Max patch, 3 patches. But the lovely thing is for me that I don't have to press any buttons or deal with any configurations or algorithms. That's all done for me. It's already on the computer, and it is generated, the change of the 3 patches is generated simply by me playing 3 keys at the top of this MIDI, which is a really smooth and beautiful device. So it doesn't interrupt the flow of what I'm doing. I can guarantee I'll go up there, play something, and the patches won't work today, but never mind, we'll hope for the best. The idea behind this was that they would take sampled sounds, a huge sound bank at Senmat, the electronic, quite famous electronic studio at Berkeley, and these are all natural prepared piano sounds inside the piano sounds, and all these melded into a whole library of sounds, which had lain disused for many years. And so I was delighted when Cindy and the team at Senmat put this together and used these patches that I also integrate in my work. So that is definitely enough about me. I want to talk a little bit about prepared piano history. So let's move on and see if there's a picture of this. I think maybe the interesting thing, first of all, is just to hear how it might sound. Bear with me, I'm working, that's why I need my glasses. I'm working on a computer I don't know. So this is actually a piece of John Cage, not written for Merce Cunningham, who was a dancer he collaborated with extensively, and of course he was his partner. This is written for Gene Erdman, another dancer in New York. that abrupt stop there. So this was the man who started this all. He was John Cage, composer, innovator, musical pioneer. As it says there, he was the inventor of this prepared piano. And throughout the 1940s, he composed it exclusively for it. The springboard for him was indeed dance. And he'd been using percussion, working with percussion quartets around the country, percussion ensembles, which apparently were very, very popular in the 1930s America. I mean, who knew? So people would come to concerts just to percussion ensembles. And to earn a living as a composer, he was working almost exclusively with dance. He came to Seattle. There was a very beautiful black dancer called Sevilla Fort, who wanted to do a solo called Bacchanal, and she wanted it to be, quite exotic. She was quite an exotic performer, and he was faced with no percussion instruments, just one small grand piano. I think it was a Steinway Model C, if I remember. I'm not even sure if they're manufacturing them anymore. People can let me know. And ideal for working with, but perhaps a little worrying if you want to, as a composer, if you want to create something, out of the ordinary, away from diatonic pitches, away from perhaps the keyboard. So he puzzled about this, and he had studied, he had gone to lectures by the wonderful Henry Cowell. Henry Cowell's lectures on world music. Cowell, way back earlier, in the 1920s, had been working inside the instrument, producing different kinds of notations, producing extraordinary pieces, such as the Banshee. Unfortunately, I don't have time to play that here today. Cage was very influenced by this, and says that he thought, maybe I can work inside the instrument in some way. There must be something. So he went to his garage, he found all sorts of plates, various things, put various nails, so on and so forth, in the instrument. He found it was useless because they bounced, they jumped out. It didn't work, so he was quite disheartened. Then he thought about it again, thought about screwing implements in, affixing implements so that they wouldn't bounce out and shatter everywhere, and managed to come up with quite a simple sounding piece to us now that, those of us who know about his output, called Bacchanal. But this was the beginning of something that he was absolutely passionate about. And as I think I mentioned, he wrote almost exclusively for this instrument throughout the 1940s. His collaboration with dance was stronger than ever. He initially began by writing very, very small pieces with very small preparations for dance. I mean, sometimes he would just do it on the day in almost a spirit of improvisation and very quick collaborations with dancers. It would be performed that evening. They would travel around. Then gradually, the rhythmic cells, the degree of the preparations, the extensiveness of the preparations became bigger and more sophisticated until he wrote serious concert works separate from the dance. But again, I just want to make the point to dancers here and to dancers out there that this was very much a springboard, this collaborative focus between dance and performance and music. I just couldn't resist putting that in because it's such a beautiful shot of John Cage preparing the piano. So as you can see, he has these various implements in there, which he is affixing. Now, this is one of perhaps the differences between what I'm doing here and what he was doing, what he was doing. He was composing very carefully with a tape measure exactly where the position of these implements would be. Of course, those of us who know and have worked on pianos of various sizes know that there can't be anything exact. There's no exactitude about this at all, because every instrument that you work on will be different. And that's a kind of fascinating thing, which I think, I know actually, developed his ideas on aleatory and chance techniques, because he was very aware that nothing that he tried to reproduce would be reproduced exactly. Just brings me back to, reminds me of something that Jen was saying about her own work. And this, rather than being an impediment, is actually a fascinating thing. Basically, preparations inside the piano, those things that are affixed, those objects, materials that are affixed inside the piano, roughly fall into these categories. We would say gongs, which I will show you later, bells, very, very high metallic sounds. This is usually produced by screwing implements, various sizes. The density of the metal implements, the density of the screws is going to affect the pitch, where they are along the string. He placed them in the center of the piano has basically 3 strings. It's a 3-strung instrument. And he could place these not only between the first 2, but also the second 2 of the strings, which, for those of you who play the piano, you know that if you use the left pedal, this also gives a double sound effect, because if you put something between the second 2 strings, between the first 2 strings, and you put this damper pedal on, you don't hear them. So you just hear the vibrations from the second 2 strings, the implements in those. So there's quite an arsenal of repertoire, a repertoire of sounds there. Mutes, I should add also, these days with gongs, we tend to use, out of frustration and exhaustion at having to argue with concert promoters, we tend to use a lot of magnets on the strings, which produce a kind of similar sound, kind of similar effect, but actually not quite as rich or interesting, I have to say. So if I can slip these in, I'm always grateful to an institution for allowing me to put them in. Mutes, rubber bungs. These days, again, we would put, I suppose, blue tack. It's not beloved of piano technicians, but there we are. This is something that composers use. Rattles, we can put little nuts on top of the string, on top of the screws, which gives a kind of hi-hat effect, percussive effect. Scrapes, also by using, by moving the screws through the strings, something that I'll demonstrate a little bit later. Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about practicalities of writing for an instrument using extended techniques. It involves stipulating what those techniques and those preparations will be. And the other side, the other difficulty is, of course, how to notate it. Cage actually used very conventional notation. However, this is from his most extensive and perhaps his most beautiful work, sonatas and interludes. 16 sonatas, very small sonatas in the style of Scarlatti. I shouldn't say in the style of Scarlatti, in the form of Scarlatti's type of sonatas, binary sonatas with repetitions. So very small sonatas, not the conventional idea of sonata. The preparations are so extensive here. You can see that, I hope you can see that you have down here where they are on the string, what the clef is. It's starting right from the very top of the treble clef. He stipulates what strings the preparation should go in. He stipulates what type of implements, materials are going to go in there. You can see that. He also stipulates how many implements will be inserted in how many strings. And finally, here he demonstrates here exactly the distance, the measurement in inches. It's very hard to see here. And you can see also then, only here does he say exactly what the notes are. So the problem for the performer here is that, it's a very extensive preparation. That's one thing. it can take from, I would say, minimum an hour really to check everything, but usually about 2 hours. It's not great. I'm being reminded that nobody can hear me if I don't walk to the microphone. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it takes between an hour and 2 hours, I would say, to do this properly. The other problem for the performer is we really have no idea exactly what pitch he wants, exactly what effect he wants, which is kind of interesting, actually, certainly for me as an improviser, but for other people it's a source of deep frustration. A lot of people wish that Cage had actually said, this is what I am aiming for, the harmonic or the pitch that I'm aiming for on the instrument. I want to just play you, I think this is the second sonata. It's again, it's a recording that I made some time ago. Yes, actually, just thinking about that and listening to that, I'm just reminded of how difficult it is as an improviser. Maybe this is one of the reasons I don't play too much on the keyboard. I think I was saying to Ben yesterday that everything ends up sounding like John Cage. So this is always this is a terrible pitfall, beautiful as it sounds, and of course everybody loves these sounds. I try to subvert those two. I should warn you the beauty of them. Yeah, I mean, all sorts of issues arise from reading a score also when you're working with an instrument, and particularly when you want to work inside with extended techniques. In a minute, I'll play you a little bit of another very great composer who personally has had a great influence on me, George Crumb, American experimental composer, who worked not with preparations but exclusively inside the instrument. I mean, one of the problems is you have to take the stand off. So for people who are quite blind like me and quite small like me, I have to stand up and sort of reach inside the piano, sometimes with feet on both pedals, hoping I don't tip backwards. I have to try to read a score from somewhere over here. You can see the attractions all the time of more and more of improvising without a score. So you do have this balancing act. You're sitting, you're standing, you're locating the correct strings. You've got to locate the correct harmonics. And I know people are going to say, well, what about iPads, Kate? But iPads and 4 scores aren't always the answer if you consider the large landscape scores of George Crumb. I'm just going to move on to this slide. Isn't that stunning? I'm sorry, I just have to. I still find this breathtaking, looking at this score. Yeah. This is from Macrocosmos, which is really a massive work, as it implies. It was a little reference to exactly the opposite, Bartók's Microcosmos, which means tiny world, small world. This is, of course, huge world. Huge work, 4 whole volumes of pieces for amplified piano, some for 2 pianos. I think it's the third set. For 2 pianos, I may be wrong, second set. So this one is the Agnus Dei from the Zodiac. I'm just going to play you a little bit of this. This uses voice, and all these techniques are working exclusively inside the instrument. Very definitely using harmonics along the nodes of the piano, just like we can on the guitar or any string instrument. So this happens here with the piano. Sorry, just a little snippet of that. I realized actually that particular one, I just wanted to show this, but there's quite a lot of just conventional playing on the keyboard as well. I want to speak just a little bit now about what free improvisation means to me in the context of what I'm doing here and with preparations. To me, it's an approach to my instrument which leads to a deeper knowledge of my instrument. You know, it challenges for me the capabilities of myself and the capabilities of the instrument. This spontaneous reaction rather than thinking. This kind of intuition, this intuitive response is very, very exciting. It can be very frightening in a way too. You have to have a certain degree of bravery, I think, when you're working in improvisation. You need to be open and ready to embrace the unexpected and the unintended, which is not always the same thing, both in a collaborator's response and in your own response. There's a quote from the wonderful Thelonious Monk when somebody asked him, you know, how did it go tonight? And he said, it was terrible. I made all the wrong mistakes. So, in other words, he couldn't actually do anything about the kind of mistakes. So there are wrong mistakes that you can make and the right mistakes. I would say in free improvisation, there's almost no wrong mistake because, you know, we can subvert what we're doing, we can change what we're doing, we can react to what we're doing, we can cut across what somebody else is doing, we can block it, we can work with it, we can, you know, imitate it. Perhaps there's a little bit too much of that goes on, I would say. In improvisation. So, you know, free also does not mean without control. I mean, often when I speak to students about this, they say, oh, yeah, free, but anything, you can do anything. It requires, I believe, a deep knowledge of your instrument and a control of the choreography when you're moving. You know, it certainly is not anything goes. It also has an internal structure. It doesn't mean that you've decided on the structure. To me, that is not actually free improvisation. It can be an improvisation. And it cannot operate without a kind of fluency, you know? You need to be versed in the characteristics of your instrument and perhaps in the characteristic of the instruments that you're working with in order to subvert or extend the techniques that you're using. I mean, for me, it's the joy of exploring your own intuition and also, of course, connecting with people from entirely different disciplines, and an exchange of ideas, an exchange of gesture, and an exchange of physicality. I have to say, this is one of the delightful things about this festival, that I'm working with two people, one of whom I've known for many years. We've always been saying, we must do some work together. That's Tansy Spinks from the art department here. And someone I don't know, and who, you know, we've never worked with, we've only spoken on the phone, and that's the theatre practitioner and movement artist, Robert Vesti. So to me, this is very exciting further extension of what I'm doing, working with musicians. I just also want to say that I have improvised with a computer program, and how incredibly disconcerting that is. It was a piece by Michael Young. It was about 10, 15 years ago, and it was at Goldsmiths University in the studio there. Dr. Michael Young, who was then part of that faculty, and he made a program whereby the computer, the algorithms would react with whatever the performer was doing, but that could also include complete silence, which for a performer, I mean, and we're not talking about the silence of a room, you know, the ambient silence. We're talking kind of Zoom silence. I know everybody knows what that means. Completely dead sound. So, where you think the whole thing has crashed. And of course, one of the problems is there are absolutely no gestures from a computer, you know, from this particular program anyway. Perhaps I should be careful before I venture into that territory. But this particular program was just simply programmed to react and randomly, this is the other thing, random reactions So because of the randomness of this algorithmically generated response, I vowed that perhaps I wouldn't work with this instrument again. But yeah, just worth putting that in there, how much of a joy it is to actually work with a physical human being for me. So this state of the unexpected, this sense of diving into the unknown, collisions, elisions, the process of joining together or merging, especially with abstract ideas. And the different responses I would get with creative artists. So I have an ensemble with quite a well-known laptop player in Jacob Rees who lives in Sweden now, but he's from Denmark, and also Tan Thuy, who lives in Sweden. She's originally from Hanoi, and she plays this wonderful instrument called the danchang. The danchang, it's like a zither, Chinese zither. And the fascinating thing for me was the pitch bending, which I could then work with. And bounce off. I'm just going to play a little of this because I often think recordings of these things don't work quite as well as the actual live experience. A snippet of that. Lastly, before I move on to this prepared piano here, I just wanted to show this, which is a little bit of what I've done with improvising with resonating instruments. This is the magnetic resonator, where strings vibrate through use of electromagnets. I hasten to add, I don't prepare this instrument. The composer prepares this instrument, the creator of the instrument, Andrew McPherson. But I've worked with this and with resonator instruments. Dr. Alice Eldridge at Sussex University plays a resonating cello, feedback cello. And with Roger Redgate on Zeta violin and, sorry, I should say Steinberger violin and special effects. So this has all sorts of problems because I couldn't really work very much inside the piano. But the interesting thing about the resonator is, as I think I mentioned earlier, you can vibrate, you can use vibrations on the keys, and you can have indefinite almost sustains with the notes. So just two of the features. Requires an entirely different technique to playing the normal piano. All right, so that's enough. Definitely enough introduction. I think it'd probably be interesting to play a few of these things. Oh dear, not quite used to this. I think it'd probably be interesting now for me to play a few of the effects and a few of the gestures that I use when I'm improvising, and which I'll be playing tomorrow, performing tomorrow with my collaborators. For me, I have to say, improvisation is not a solo act. For me, essentially, it's a collaboration. It's a collaborative process. It's just how I approach it. And so I'm not going to say this is an improvisation, but I just simply want to show you some of the things I'm going to do. So.